Boys and girls, Benjamin Bok Choy here, and we find ourselves at yet another summer break, this time for the 2025 Formula One season. It has been quite a different season for fans in a while, as there's finally a legitimate fight for the championship not involving drivers named Hamilton or Verstappen. And as of right now anyway, the two leading drivers will be fighting for their first ever Drivers' Championship. But that's still half a season away and not what we are talking about today, so let's crack on with it. Here are my driver ratings so far for the 2025 F1 calendar. We will be ranking every driver out of 10 and going through constructor ranking positions so no one feels like I'm being biased. Here's how my grading system works. A 0 is this driver should not be in F1, a 5 is a solid average season, and a 10 is a perfect season. So first up is Jack Doohan. He had an impressive quali at Australia that was ruined by yellow flags, though he did not do himself any favors by crashing on the first lap by himself. In the Chinese sprint, his poor race was compounded with a collision on the last lap with Gabriel Bortoleto, and his feature race fared no better with a 10-second penalty for pushing Hadjar off the track on lap 46. Japan saw Doohan in a heavy crash after failing to turn off DRS heading into turn 1 in practice. His weekend did not get better with a P15 finish in the race. Jack started off Bahrain well with a P11 start, though he finished 14th on track, losing a place to his own 5-second penalty, but gained it back after Hülkenberg was hit with a plank wear penalty post-race. He had a horrible race at Jeddah, not managing to improve on his P17 start. Miami started off poorly with a P16 finish in the sprint and then a collision on lap 1 in the feature race. His grade, 3 out of 10. With all the rumors that he was only on a 5-race contract and the signing of Colapinto as reserve, Jack was almost always doomed to fail. But if it's any consolation, his hotshot replacement has also failed to live up to expectations as well. He has made rookie mistakes, but there just aren't enough races to truly grade him. Up next, Franco Colapinto. Colapinto replaced Jack Doohan at Alpine for the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix and did not start out so great, crashing out of Q1. He finished exactly where he started in P16, only ahead of Bierman, who had a pit issue, and Bortoleto, who unlucked out with the VSC. He qualified last at the DRS train fest that was Monaco, well off the pace of Pierre Gasly. A poor quali run plan in Spain saw him stuck at the back of the grid all race long. At Canada, he managed to qualify 11th, but finished outside of the points. At Austria, while Gasly got into Q3, Colapinto started the race in 14th and was penalized when getting in the way of Piastri while fighting with Yuki Tsunoda. Silverstone fared no better as a crash in quali saw him starting in the pit lane only to retire before the race got going. He started the Spa Sprint 19th and finished 19th. While he qualified better for the feature race on Sunday, he only managed to finish ahead of Isaac Hadjar, who had car problems. At Hungary, he had a decent run in quali getting into Q2 and finished ahead of Gasly, though Gasly had received the penalty after getting into it with Sainz later in the race. His grade, 2.5 out of 10. The Alpine is not a car that is a shoe-in for even the last few points positions on any given race weekend, but Gasly has managed to score on several occasions while Colapinto has missed the mark in every race. For someone who was able to keep up with Albon in the 2024 Williams, not coming close to scoring points in the Alpine is a big disappointment. There have been a few bright spots and he seems to be progressing a bit, but Doohan fans will be left wondering why Jack was replaced for Franco all season long if he doesn't get on the score sheet. And now the last of the Alpine drivers, Pierre Gasly. At the season opener, he was looking to finish in the points until a poor strategy call in the changing weather conditions saw him lose out to those who pit earlier. And then a mistake at turn 1 on lap 54 of 57 saw him shuffled behind the two chasing Ferraris. He had an anonymous weekends at China and Japan, with the former being made worse with a disqualification for his car being underweight. Gasly qualified an amazing 5th in Bahrain and was promoted to P4 on this grid due to an Antonelli penalty. He sat in the middle of the points most of the race and only dropped to P7 with Verstappen overtaking him on the last lap. Looking to capitalize on a strong quali at Jeddah, he was disappointed to have his race end early after being sent into the wall by Yuki Tsunoda. Miami saw Gasly score a point in the sprint after multiple cars were hit with post-race penalties. However, his feature race saw him outside the points once again. At Imola, Gasly started the race off in the points but was shuffled down the grid when Leclerc sent him off track on lap 3 during an overtake, ultimately finishing in P13. Monaco was a dreadful weekend. The slow Alpine saw him knocked out in Q1 and another brush with Tsunoda saw him not finish the race. Spain saw his luck turn a bit, starting 8th and finishing 8th after Verstappen's penalty dropped Max down to P10. A new power unit saw Gasly start from the pit lane at Canada, but even a new engine could not help finishing higher than 15th. At Austria, he made it all the way to Q3 but spun out on his final run. The weekend would not get better as he finished the race in P13. Pierre somehow managed to drag the Alpine into Q3 at Silverstone, qualifying 8th, and then topped the weekend off, passing Stroll on the final lap to finish P6. Gasly's Spa weekend was a mixed bag of luck. Qualified 8th for the sprint, but car problems saw him not start with the rest of the grid. A poor qualifying saw him start the feature race in 13th, but he was able to extract what he could from the Alpine to take home a lone point after frustrating the back of the grid leading a DRS train. Hungary was a weekend to forget as the Alpine just did not have pace. A poor performance was made worse with a late penalty when he came together with the signs. His grade, a 6.5 out of 10. The car is just not fast enough on most race weekends, but when it is, Gasly has been able to drag out points from a car that probably shouldn't be in the points. Even with rookie teammates, Pierre has far outperformed whoever is driving in the next stall and has shown an ability to hold off cars that probably should never be behind him in the first place, so a 6.5 means he is driving better than an average driver. Up next, the Haas drivers and Esteban Ocon. He started the season opener qualifying poorly and only finished 13th because everyone else him DNF'd or was Ali Behrman. He had a sprint to forget in China but finished P7 on track in the Sunday race that was promoted to P5 after Ferrari penalties. He was fairly beaten in quali by his teammate at Japan and just could not get going for the race, finishing in 18th. A huge crash at Bahrain qualifying saw him start in 14th, but a strong race saw him finish in 8th with 4 points. At Jeddah, he was beaten by Behrman in both quali and the race. He had another middling weekend at Miami, missing out on points in the sprint and feature race after qualifying P9 for Sunday. Another bad qualifying at Imola allowed Ocon to try the lap 2 stop onto Hard's strategy. Unfortunately, his race ended on lap 29 with car problems. At Monaco, put in a great quality to start 8th and finished 7th after Alonso DNF'd. He was the slower of the Haas drivers at Spain and just could not do anything to improve on his P16 qualifying position. Ocon did not look especially quick in Canada, but a P14 start was helped with a long first stint that saw him come out ahead of his pit stop in 10th, which turned into a P9 finish after Norris crashed out. He qualified worse than Behrman at Austria, but was able to convert a poor quali into points during the race, finishing in 10th, though behind Hülkenberg, who he started ahead of. He managed to survive the opening lap of the British Grand Prix when he found himself the meat in a 3-car sandwich. But unlike teams who pitted early for dries at Silverstone, Ocon stayed out too long before switching over. This saw him battling outside the points for most of the day before his teammate driving into him pretty much ended any chance for points. He surprised the F1 world with a 5th in the Belgian Grand Prix sprint quali and race. However, his race on Sunday saw him finish only 15th. Disappointing considering the pace of the Haas earlier in the weekend. Outpaced by his teammate at Hungary, Ocon could only manage a P17 qualifying and P17 finish, only finishing ahead of his teammate as a result of a DNF. A slow pit stop also did not help. His grade, 6 out of 10. The Haas car seems to be all over the place this season and not very quick overall. However, Ocon has managed to score points whenever the car seems to be working. He is outqualifying his teammate, but only 8 to 6. He has peaks and lows while his teammate is more consistent, and currently he has more points, but Behrman is a rookie and has multiple P11 finishes under his belt, so the battle is closer than it seems. I expected more from a seasoned vet with a rookie teammate. Up next, Oliver Bearman. In his first outing for Haas, he only participated in 2 practice sessions and crashed out of both of those practice sessions. He finished last of all the cars that finished the race. He outqualified and beat his teammate in the Chinese sprint, but was beaten by Ocon in the feature race where he finished 8th after the Ferrari disqualifications. He made it into Q3 at Japan and managed to finish P10. A poor quali at Bahrain saw him start 20th, but a solid first stint and timely safety car helped him jump up 10 positions to score a point. At Jeddah, he was the faster of the 2 Haas cars, but only managed a P13 finish. In Miami, he was able to snatch the final point in the sprint before losing it due to an unsafe release penalty. And his luck did not get better on Sunday as he had to retire from engine problems. Bearman was quicker than Ocon all weekend in Spain, but a 10-second penalty for passing Lawson off track saw him demoted from 13th to 17th. He lost out on getting into Q2 at Imola by a last-second red flag that saw his fastest lap not count. He benefited from the VSC, but one of his tires not being attached properly saw him have to pit again and ultimately finished in 17th. His finishing position of 12th at Monaco flattered the pace of the car. He benefited from pitting early and cars ahead driving slow to secure points for teammates further up the grid. He outqualified his teammate at Spain, but a time penalty in so-so race saw him finish 17th. Again was the quicker of the Haas drivers at Canada, but a P11 finish looks better on paper as he only finished there due to 2 DNFs. At Austria, he started ahead of his teammate, but his race pace saw him drop behind Ocon, who secured the last point of the weekend. Bearman did not qualify well but looked pretty quick at Silverstone. The weekend was all about surviving collisions, the first coming in the pit lane during practice. In the race, after surviving a shunt from Tsunoda and driving into his teammate, he was still quick enough to threaten points from Albon and Alonso, though ultimately he fell short. He was able to help Haas have a double points finish in the Spa sprint and was quicker than Ocon in the race, but power issues saw him finish just outside the points after fighting in the points during the race. He qualified well at Hungary, starting the race at 11th, and even drove in the points positions for a while, though damage to his car forced him to retire with about 20 laps to go. His grade 6 out of 10. Again, with such a slow car, it is hard to penalize him for not having many points. He seems to be quicker than his teammate at half the track so far, but with the nature of their car, just has not been fortunate enough to score more points. He came into the season with a lot of hype, and although he has fallen a bit short, it hasn't been by much. Moving on to the Racing Bulls and Liam Lawson. While racing for Red Bull at Australia, he did very little to impress, starting at the back of the grid while teammate Verstappen started on the second row. Crashing on his own did little to help his weekend. China was a weekend to forget, where he spent both races fighting with and driving into slower cars at the back of the grid. He had his best qualifying so far this season after being demoted for the Japanese Grand Prix, but didn't have enough to finish better than P17. A poor qualifying at Bahrain in 17th was made worse with 15 seconds of penalties. One more bad weekend in a young season. He managed to outqualify teammate Hajar at Jeddah, but the Gasly-Tsunoda incident saw Hajar take a position from him. He finished 11th on track but lost another position post-race to Alonso due to a 10-second penalty. Lawson's weekend in Miami was marred by incidents in both races with Alonso and Doohan, putting him out of the points in the sprint and having to retire in the main race. He lost out in qualifying at Imola due to a red flag, but did not do himself any favors in the race by just driving okay. He started 15th and ended 14th. He made it into Q3 at Monaco, but behind his teammate. As there was no chance at passing, he played the team game by backing everyone up outside of his teammate's pit window and finished in P8. Lawson was running in the points at Spain when the late safety car came out, but deciding not to pit onto fresh rubber ultimately cost him points as he was just a few seconds outside Verstappen's penalty window. He started Canada from the pit lane after changing parts and retired early when he could not make any progress. Lawson stunned his critics at Austria with a stonking P6 qualifying. His race was even more impressive, finishing best of the rest behind the top 5. He did not qualify well at Silverstone, starting 15th, and the race did not go better when he was involved in a 3-wide collision that saw his day over before completing a single lap. His luck turned around for the Belgian Grand Prix, and though he didn't score points in the sprint, he managed to convert a P9 qualifying to finish in 8th. He managed to finish 8th again at Hungary after one-stopping his way to a strong race. His score, 5.5 out of 10. His season started off poorly, and the hit to his confidence did not help at all. He has been improving with the last few race weekends, but with such a slow start to the season, I can't give him anything better than just a little bit better than average season so far. Up next, Isaac Hajar, who impressed with a P11 qualifying at Australia, but never got to start the race as he crashed out on the formation lap in the wet. His sprint portion of the Chinese Grand Prix weekend was forgettable, but very much like Yuki Tsunoda, his teammate at the time, a possible chance at points in the feature race was squandered with poor strategy, resulting in a P11 finish. A shocking P7 in quali at the Japanese Grand Prix saw him finish 8th, only losing out to Hamilton the entire race. Following an impressive Suzuka weekend, he only managed to finish 13th at Bahrain, and again only qualified 14th at Jeddah. However, he did finish 10th by the end of the day. He had the pace to finish higher if not for Williams playing the team game. He had a pretty solid weekend in Miami, just missing out on points in the sprint and barely missing out on points in the feature race by less than 0.2 of a second after Tsunoda's penalty. He started at Imola in 9th and climbed up the grid with help from the safety cars, but the pace of the V-carb would not allow him to finish any higher than where he started. Impressed with a P5 quali at Monaco that saw him finish 6th with help from Lawson. Hajar continued making his argument for Rookie of the Year by qualifying 9th in Spain and finishing 7th. After a couple points finishes in a row, Canada was a bit of a disappointment. Poor strategy got him caught in traffic, which ultimately had him finish in 16th. He was not far off Lawson in quali at Austria, but visibly slower than his teammate in the race. Damage to the car did not help as Hajar came home in 12th after an early pit stop. At Spa, he was gifted the final point after Gasly had to start from the pit lane in the sprint. And the featured race seemed to be going well with Hajar fighting early at the back end of the points positions, but a power unit issue saw him finish as the only driver lapped at the end of the race. His luck would not change at Hungary as he finished 11th after getting into Q3. On a day where his teammates secured points, finishing just outside the points was a disappointment. His grade so far, 7.5 out of 10. So far he's looking to be the best rookie on the grid this season. Had some bad luck with strategy calls early on in the year, but seems to be getting as much as he can out of the car when things are going well. Lawson seems to be catching up in the last few races, but Hajar has held his own as a rookie. He has exceeded expectations, and a 7.5 out of 10 is a very good grade. Moving on to the Kick Saubers and Gabriel Bortoleto. As with most of the other rookies, he did not finish the season opener at Australia after crashing on his own. The Sauber just looks slow at China, where Bortoleto finished 18th in the sprint and 14th in the feature race after 3 cars were disqualified. He had a poor weekend at Japan where he only managed to not come in last due to a 2-stop from Lance Stroll. Started 18th at Bahrain where he finished and had a poor weekend all around. A mistake at Jeddah qualifying saw him start the race last, and losing a drag race to the finish line to Jack Doohan saw him finish last of all the runners left on track. He had another disappointing weekend at Miami, finishing outside the points in the sprint and then retiring early on in the feature race. He outqualified his teammate at Imola, but the timing of the VSC and safety cars did not allow him to improve his positions, finishing in 18th. Had to do a 3-stop race at Monaco due to early damage, and his race was over then and there. Bortoleto was the faster of the kicks in Spain qualifying, but pit strategy worked against him in the race, finishing in 12th. Canada was another underwhelming weekend where he started 15th and finished 14th, only due to retirements from drivers ahead. After that poor weekend, Bortoleto managed to get into Q3 and start in 8th for Austria. A first lap incident from Antonelli and Verstappen lost Bortoleto some positions, but he managed to come back and finish in 8th, securing his first points of the season. Silverstone was a weekend to forget as a poor qualifying was followed by a shunt early in the race that ended his day. Bortoleto went pointless in the Spa sprint, but his race day saw him fare better. After starting 10th, team orders helped him secure P9 before leaving his teammate in the mirrors. There he would stay for the rest of the race. He would follow a good race at Spa with another at Hungary, making it into Q3 and defending well against Max Verstappen early on to finish the race in 6th behind Alonso. Score, 5 out of 10. Just an average first half of the season. Sure, the kick has not been fast all year, but until recent races has had trouble improving his qualifying position in the race. On the upside, he has outqualified his teammate 8-6, but has had trouble converting them into points, while his teammate has scored 37 to his 14. Up next, Nico Hülkenberg. He started the season opener at the back of the grid, but a timely pit stop helped him jump up to 7th, where he finished the race. Damage to the car and a trip off track saw Hülkenberg finish behind his rookie teammate at both races at China. He had a poor weekend at Suzuka, only finishing where he started in 16th. Again, starting 16th at Bahrain, he was dropped to last after being forced off on lap 1 and then disqualified after finishing 15th due to plank wear. Hülkenberg managed to qualify P9 and finished 11th for the Miami Sprint, but he was outqualified by his teammate for the main race and finished a lap behind the leaders. Although outqualified by Bortoleto in Imola, a strong first stint and timely pit stop under the VSC allowed him to move up before the full safety car saw him finish in 12th. He did well to qualify 13th at Monaco, but being the track that it is, could not improve and finished in 16th. At Spain, he qualified a lowly P15, but found himself in P7 by the safety car restart late in the race. A pass on Hamilton found him finishing in 6th and ultimately promoted to 5th after Verstappen's penalty. Canada was another weekend that saw Hülkenberg improve on his qualifying position. After starting in 11th, he finished the day in P8. Hülkenberg started Austria in last place, but by the end of the race, he was P9 behind his teammate. Considering he started 12 spots behind, Hülkenberg had a much better drive than Bortoleto. Silverstone was the highlight of his season and career. Starting 19th, Hülkenberg stormed up to the top positions, avoiding an almost crash on a safety car restart, and managed to make a gutsy pit stop work to secure his first ever podium. Was never on pace with his rookie teammate at Spa after his performance at Silverstone. He was nowhere in the sprint, and a two-stopper in the race was all for naught after coming out behind the Gasly train. He fared no better at Hungary with a poor quali and a penalty for a jump start that saw his day end well outside the points. His score, 6.5 out of 10. A lot of people are going to crucify me for this one, but hear me out. He has been outqualified by his teammate. He has been knocked out of Q1 on more than a few occasions. Like Bortoleto, he sometimes has difficulty moving up the grid in races. His few highlights seem to have blinded a lot of fans to his just average performance every other race. Yes, I am happy he got the podium, but 2 or 3 great finishes that were helped by safety cars and weather should not overshadow an otherwise average season. 34 of his 37 points came from just 3 races where either changing weather conditions or safety cars helped him jump and maintain positions. It's like saying Ricciardo had a great year because he won that one race at Monza. Never mind the fact that Norris kicked the crap out of him in every other race. So that's just my opinion. Be sure to fill the comments with your rage. Moving on to the Aston Martins and Lance Stroll. Lance was knocked out of Q2 at the Australian season opener, but a mistake-free race helped him to finish 6th at the end of it all. Just missed out on points in the Chinese sprint, but managed to do so in the Sunday race, finishing P9 while his teammate retired early on. A poor quali saw him start last and finish last after being the only driver to opt for a 2-stop race. Along with his teammate, he had an forgettable weekend at Bahrain, only making up 2 positions to finish 17th. At Jeddah, he qualified behind and finished behind his teammate in 16th, making up no positions from his starting grid. Miami was a better weekend, where he finished P5 in the sprint after an early switch to dry tires, but the feature race was more of the same, where he finished in 16th, slower of the 2 Aston Martins. He did well enough to reach Q3 at Imola, but much like Alonso, the safety cars did not help and saw him fall to P15. At Monaco, he was hit with 2 grid penalties before the race even began for impeding, and he finished 15th. At Spain, fans were greeted with the news that Stroll would be sitting out of the race due to pain in his wrist. Whatever the real story was, he did not participate in the race after qualifying in 14th, and no one replaced him on Sunday. He came back from his injury for his home Grand Prix, where he managed to only qualify 17th and finished there after receiving a penalty for pushing Gasly off track on lap 46. Stroll looked strong in practice at the Red Bull Ring but couldn't convert it on race day, starting ahead of some of the point scorers and finishing well behind them in 14th. At Silverstone, Stroll was outperformed by Alonso on Saturday, but a timely call to the pits saw him jump quite a few positions. He was driving as high as P3, but Lance Stroll drove like Lance Stroll and ultimately finished in 7th. Stroll was able to finish ahead of his teammate in the Spa sprint, but the Aston Martins were just too slow to even get near the points all weekend. After a poor Belgian Grand Prix, everyone was surprised to see how quick the Aston Martins were at Hungary. Stroll managed to stick close enough to Alonso, lost out on a position to Bortoleto at the start, but did well enough to secure P7 at the end of the race. His grade, a 4 out of 10. Just a below average season. The car seems to be slow and even Alonso can't seem to get the performance out of it. They are tied with 26 points in the driver's standings, though Alonso seems to be having a much better season that the points will tell. At this point in his career, I expect Stroll to be improving, but he still seems to be the same driver that we all know and love. His few bright spots this season shows he can hang with the rest of the grid, but it just seems like he doesn't want to be there half the time. And when the team puts him in a position to come home with points, he manages to somehow give them all away. Up next, Fernando Alonso. He was running in the points at the season opener until gravel kicked onto the track caused him to crash out halfway through the race. He finished behind Stroll in the Chinese sprint and retired on lap 4 on Sunday after a brake issue. Japan was his best chance at his first points of the season, but only managed a P11 finish. The Aston Martin looked slow, with Alonso only managing to qualify 13th at Bahrain. The race did not go better as he fell further back in the race to finish P15. At the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, he qualified 13th and finished 12th on track, being promoted to 11th after Lawson's 10-second penalty. Alonso was sitting in the points at the Miami sprint before Lawson saw an end to that by crashing into him, and he didn't do himself any favors spinning in the feature race before finishing in P15. He finished 11th at Imola after qualifying in 5th, but an early pit stop saw him lose positions that the pace of the Aston Martin did not allow him to regain. His first chance at points were at Monaco, starting the race in 6th, but car issues saw him retire on lap 38. Alonso had a strong quali at Spain that saw him start P10. He was outside the points when the late safety car came out, but a smart decision to stop for fresh tires saw him finish 9th, just barely ahead of Verstappen after his penalty, scoring his first points of the season at home. His first points of the season were followed by another points finish at Canada as Alonso executed another strong race. He started in 6th and finished in 7th. 2 points finishes in a row deserved another as Alonso managed to finish in the points at Austria the next race weekend. His one-stop strategy helped secure a P7 finish ahead of his protege in Bortoleto. He looked to have the pace over his teammate at the British Grand Prix, but a poor strategy call saw him finish 9th after being passed by Albon on the final lap. At Spa, the Aston Martin was just not quick enough. Alonso did all that he could, but spent almost the entire weekend at the back of the grid. Surprisingly, the Aston Martin looked quick at Hungary, allowing Alonso to qualify 5th. A good start saw him jump up to 4th momentarily before Norris passed in a much faster McLaren. He held off attacks from his protege Bortoleto for a while before settling to finish 5th. His grade, 6.5 out of 10. Although tied with his teammate in points, Alonso has had the pace on almost every race weekend, outqualifying Stroll at every event except one sprint qualifying session. The car is slow, but whenever bad luck isn't ruining his day, he has been able to score points when the car allows. Unlike his teammate, Alonso puts himself in a position to come home with points and then watches as his team or bad luck gives them all away. Now moving on to Williams and Carlos Sainz. Carlos qualified well in P10 for his first race in a Williams, but it was all undone when he crashed out in the final corner under safety car. The Chinese sprint saw him only finish ahead of Jack Doohan in both kicks, but he received a decent consolation prize, earning his first point in the featured race after Gasly and the 2 Ferraris were disqualified. He qualified in 12th at Suzuka, but an impeding penalty saw him down 3 positions, only managing to improve 1 spot by the end of the race. Finally outqualified Albon for the first time at Bahrain, but damage from Tsunoda saw him drop to P20, where he retired with a few laps to go. Jeddah was the second weekend in a row where he outqualified his teammate and started 6th. He didn't have the pace to hold onto it, but his team play allowed him to help him and his teammate finish 8th and 9th respectively. At Miami, a poor attack on Stroll saw him out of the sprint race, and after an impressive P6 quali for Sunday, he lost out after having to avoid a rejoining Norris, getting damage after contact with Albon, also avoiding Norris. He lost out to the Ferraris after VSC and finished in P9. Seemingly the faster of the two at Imola, he was hard done by an early pit call that was made worse by an ensuing VSC. He managed to fight back up to P8, but his pace probably deserved more points. Played the team game to help Albon at Monaco, who returned the favor to help him score the final point on the grid. Spain was not the homecoming Sainz wanted, as an unbalanced car and damaged front wing that made the imbalance worse saw him finish in P14. Both Williams cars ran into problems at Canada, but Sainz made the best of it, moving up from 16th to finish in 10th after Norris retired. He had one of his worst weekends at Austria, where he could only manage a P19 quali position before his race was ended when his brakes caught fire in the pit lane after not even being able to set off on the formation lap. Seemingly the quicker of the two Williams drivers at Silverstone, his race was ruined when Leclerc understeered them both off the track at Stowe and out of the points. He outperformed Albon in the Spa sprint, but could not follow it up with a good Sunday. After qualifying 17th and starting from the pits after making changes to the car, he only managed an 18th place finish. Williams always admitted Hungary would be tough, and their prediction came true. Although faster than his teammate, he couldn't manage to improve on his starting position and ended the race in P14. A clash with Gasly did not help. His score, 6 out of 10. He's outqualified 8-6 in the Grand Prix and 2-1 in the sprints, but Carlos has shown signs of progress this season. Unfortunately, on the weekends he is faster than Albon. The car just either doesn't have enough pace to score points, or Yuki is driving into him. Many expected him to crush Albon right away, but it seems he needs more time adjusting to the car. There have been flashes of his former Ferrari and McLaren success, but underwhelming so far this year. Next, his teammate Alex Albon. Alex started the season off well at Australia, only losing out on P4 on the last lap to a much quicker Mercedes. Did not finish in the points for the Chinese sprint race, but managed an impressive P7 in the feature race after both Ferraris were disqualified. In Japan, he qualified 9th and managed a boring race to finish in 9th. He missed out on Q3 at Bahrain due to a late lap deletion to Hülkenberg, and an untimely safety car saw him finish outside the points. He was clearly the slower of the two Williams at Jeddah and only managed to finish 9th due to Sainz slowing down, giving him the slipstream and DRS towards the end of the race. At Miami, Albon finished the sprint in 4th but was demoted outside the points after a safety car infringement was penalized post-race. On Sunday, he overtook Sainz on first lap and was able to finish in a surprising 5th. Imola was another weekend where teammate Sainz looked much quicker. However, a long first stint allowed Albon to emerge from the VSC in a podium position. A late almost penalty to Leclerc gifted him P5, but it was still a strong weekend for Albon. Somehow managed to drag a Williams into Q3 at Monaco, but could not do better than P10. He was promoted to P9 after the Alonso retirement and help from Sainz. Spain was always going to be a tough weekend for Williams, but made tougher for Albon when he damaged his front wing twice and retired early on after serving a 10-second penalty for his incident with Lawson. A decent qualifying at Canada saw him start 9th, but early fighting with Colapinto caused him positions before power unit issues saw him have another early exit in a row. Albon did not qualify well at Austria, but after the Antonelli-Verstappen incident, he saw himself running as high as P6. Unfortunately, the DNF gremlin struck again and saw Albon retire early on lap 17. He was knocked out of Q2 at Silverstone and seemingly slower than Sainz all weekend, though his race was helped out when Leclerc took out the two cars ahead of him. Alonso on aging tires also could not put up much of a fight as Albon overtook on the final lap to secure P8. Alex's Belgian Grand Prix started off poorly, being stuck in traffic for the sprint race while Sainz finished in the points. But a strong quali for the race on Sunday saw him start in P5, only losing one position to a Mercedes before holding off a Ferrari to come home in 6th. Albon had his worst qualifying all season at Hungary and only started 19th, courtesy of Tsunoda's pit lane start. He managed to gain a few positions, but the pace of the Williams in traffic ahead saw him finish 15th. His score, 8 out of 10. Probably the surprise driver of the season so far, as he is sitting 8th in the driver's standings, and he probably could be ahead of Antonelli, who is only 10 points ahead if not for a string of 3 races where the Mercedes power unit crapped out on him. I cannot give him any higher than an 8, as Sainz has beaten him on some weekends, but for someone who was in a Williams and getting a new teammate that is a proven race winner, Albon has surpassed expectations. Moving on now to Red Bull and Yuki Tsunoda. Still in the V-Carb at the time, he managed to qualify P5 at Australia, only to have the race undone by a poor pit strategy that saw him tumble down the grid and out of the points. He finished the Chinese sprint in P6 and qualified P9 for the Sunday race, but poor strategy again and a broken front wing that came out of nowhere dropped him outside the points. He started his Red Bull career well by actually getting in Q2 at his home race, but an underwhelming race saw him finish outside the points once again. However, he made it into Q3 at Bahrain and was able to finish P9, securing his first points in a Red Bull seat. He qualified while at Jeddah, managing a P9 start, but an early incident on lap 1 involving Gasly saw his race end before it could get started. He had a poor Miami sprint but finished P6 after penalties, and managed to barely finish 10th after receiving a penalty early on in the feature race, finishing 0.168 seconds ahead of Hadjar. His weekend at Imola started with a crash in Q1, but he managed to finish in the points after starting from the pit lane. He started 12th at Monaco, but pitting early and getting stuck behind slower cars saw him drop to 17th. Spain saw him starting in the pits and did well enough to make it up to P13, but it's a disappointing weekend when you finish 13th while your teammate is fighting the winners of the race. Canada saw him have an average qualifying once again, only to make no progress during the race. He finished 12th at the end of it all. Austria was no better. Contact with Colapinto fighting ahead of lapping cars, 3 pit stops and a time penalty saw Yuki finishing in 16th. Qualifying wasn't too bad at Silverstone, starting 11th at race start, but he just could not seem to get comfortable in the car. Sending Bierman off the track and receiving a time penalty did not help. After a poor sprint performance at Spa, Tsunoda was given the same floor spec as his teammate. He managed to qualify an impressive P7, but a poor call from the pit wall saw Tsunoda miss a call to the pits and saw him switch much later than everyone else for the slicks. This saw him tumble outside the points after a hopeful qualifying. After a moment of hope in Belgium, Tsunoda's performance at Hungary has brought expectations back down to earth. He wasn't far off Verstappen in Q1, but barely missed out on getting into Q2. A pit lane start did not help, as Yuki only managed to finish in 17th. His score, a 3 out of 10. He probably should have more points for his drives at V-Carb, but the team let him down. And by now, we all know the issues Red Bull have with their car and second seat. However, Yuki is not a rookie like Lawson, and claiming he could be faster in the Red Bull didn't earn him any brownie points. It's tough to grade him, as everyone else in the second Red Bull seat has not met expectations for like the last 7 years. And there have been a few moments of hope shining through, but Yuki really needs to score more points if he expects to stay in F1. I can't imagine many teams will be looking to procure his services if he doesn't score more points. The only saving grace is that even Verstappen seems to be falling down the grid as well, so hopefully that will make Yuki's performances look not so bad in comparison. Up next, Max Verstappen. The Red Bull was slower than the McLarens at Australia, but Max managed to take P2 early in the race before a mistake saw him drop back down to 3rd. A mistake late from Piastri allowed Verstappen to get ahead and finish the race in 2nd. He qualified and sat in P2 for most of the China sprint until a late move from Piastri dropped him to 3rd. A poor start on Sunday saw him fall from P4 to P6, but he managed to take those positions back and finish 4th. With the pace of the McLarens, it was surprising to see Max take the Red Bull from pole to victory at Japan. Bahrain was the first weekend where the Red Bull looked visibly slow. Verstappen only started 7th and would have finished there if not for a last lap overtake on Gasly. He qualified on pole at Jeddah, but a 5-second penalty from cutting the first corner saw him finish in 2nd. Verstappen's Miami sprint was undone by an unsafe pit release, dropping him to last under the safety car finish. He qualified on pole for Sunday, but the faster McLarens were able to get ahead, and then a late VSC allowed Russell to pit and get out ahead of him as well. At Imola, he managed to qualify in P2, and a brave lunge into the first chicane saw him take the lead, which he never relinquished. He only managed to qualify 4th at Monaco, where he finished the race. An excellent start at Spain saw Max move into P2 at the start, however the McLarens were just too quick. A late safety car saw Max switching to hards in P3 while everyone else around him went onto softs. After wheel banging and losing a position to Leclerc, a hard defense on Russell had his pit wall telling him to give the position to the Mercedes to avoid a time penalty as the field was bunched up after the safety car restart. In a moment reminiscent of a young Verstappen, Max gave up P4 to Russell only to drive into him at the next corner. The ensuing time penalty saw Max drop from 5th all the way down to 10th. In Canada, Max played second fiddle to George Russell all weekend. He qualified P2 and finished P2. On a weekend where the McLarens seemed off the pace and only one of them finished the race, Verstappen could have closed the gap a bit to the McLarens if he had won. A lack of new tires in Austria qualifying saw Max only start 7th, but a rookie mistake from Antonelli saw his day done at turn 2. He pulled a pole position out of his hat at Silverstone, but like Piastri, made a very un-Max-like error at the safety car restart that saw him stuck between the two Williams cars behind. He did well enough to fight back up to P5, but even in a slow-looking Red Bull, more points were on hand. After a surprising sprint win at Spa from 2nd, Verstappen had some trouble doing the same thing on race day. He qualified 4th for Sunday and spent his entire race staring at a Ferrari gearbox. He was able to launch attacks on a few occasions, but was just carrying too much downforce to overtake. A poor Saturday at the Hungaroring saw him start only 8th for Sunday, and an early call to the pits saw him stuck in traffic and spending most of his race clawing back up to his starting position. A bad day all around for the Red Bull team as Max was only able to secure 9th, with Max even falling back from a one-stopping Lawson towards the end. His score, an 8 out of 10. The car is not the dominant Red Bull of 2022 and 2023, and the team has made quite a few bad strategy calls, but Max has still managed to extract all that he can from this car. The only reason I cannot give him a higher grade is that the slow car seems to be getting to his head a bit, and we have seen him make quite a few unforced errors on track, mainly spinning out at Silverstone and losing his head at Spain. But he has also put in astonishing drives such as Suzuka and Imola. He may look out of contention for the Drivers' Championship for now, but if anyone can pull back an almost 100-point gap, my money would be on Max. Moving on now to the Mercedes and Kimi Antonelli. He was knocked out of Q1 at Australia from a mistake, but managed to charge back up through the field, albeit with a few hiccups to finish 4th on the grid. Finished 7th in the Chinese sprint, but floor damage early in the feature race saw him only finish P6 after Ferrari disqualifications, over 40 seconds behind his teammate Russell. At Suzuka, he managed to finish P6, only a second behind his teammate. Granted, Russell was slowed down by a Ferrari he could not overtake. He started 5th at Bahrain after a one-place grid penalty, but a 3-stopper and untimely safety car saw him finish in 11th outside the points. He finished P6 at Jeddah after a charging Norris made his way through the field, but looked strong, finishing only 7 seconds behind Russell. Antonelli stunned everyone with a Miami sprint pole, but he could not convert it into a victory after contact with Verstappen in the pits. On Sunday, he started 3rd, got up to as high as P2, but ultimately finished in P6. He had a poor quali at Imola that saw him start in 13th, but was driving well in 8th ahead of his teammate when a throttle issue forced him out of the race. He had another poor quali at Monaco and just could not improve with the nature of the track. Kimi was running in 7th at Spain and looking to grab a decent amount of points when his engine gave out and saw him leave the weekend without any points. In Canada, he started 4th, but a good start saw him jump Piastri and hold him off until the end of the race. After a few disappointing results, his first podium should have helped his confidence a little bit, though starting 4 spots behind his teammate at the Red Bull Ring didn't help, nor did bowling into Verstappen at turn 2 and ending both drivers' race. Antonelli's bad luck continued at Silverstone, where a bad strategy saw him fall to the back of the pack before Hajar, unable to see him, drove into the back of his Mercedes and ended his race early. His poor form followed him to Spa, where an off in sprint qualifying saw his chances for points gone, and a pit lane start on Sunday guaranteed he could never advance up the grid with his wet setup. Hungary saw an improvement to Antonelli's confidence. However, a questionable decision to only give him one run in Q2 saw him start the race in 15th. A strong race saw him finish in the points, but his quali run plan leaves a lot to be desired. His score, a 4.5 out of 10. A few bright spots from a very young rookie who is obviously experiencing some growing pains. His performance at Canada shows that the talent is there, but Mercedes need to work on building his confidence before the poor performances destroys it altogether. Personally, Antonelli probably should have gone to a midfield or backmarker team for a little bit of seasoning. Fortunately, Mercedes doesn't have anyone in the pipeline that looks like a better option, and Verstappen has already announced he is staying with Red Bull for 2026. This should take some pressure off Antonelli, and hopefully he can build from the points performances at Spa and Hungary. People have to remember he is only 18 and a Max Verstappen only comes around once every 50 years or so. Up next, George Russell, who drove a lonely race at Australia, not able to keep up with Max or the McLarens, but drove mistake-free and came home on the podium in the opening race of the season. He finished the Chinese sprint in 4th and the featured race in 3rd behind much faster cars, started 5th and finished 5th at Japan, unable to overtake at Suzuka. He qualified 2nd at Bahrain, only to start 3rd after a penalty for being released too early from the pits. He managed to jump Leclerc on the softer tires on lap 1 where he finished the race. Started at Jeddah in 3rd, but an early pit stop saw him lose out to Leclerc and Norris on fresher tires. Russell managed to beat his teammate in the Miami sprint and feature race despite being out-qualified by Antonelli in both qualifying sessions. He started Imola in P3, but an untimely VSC and safety car saw him ultimately finish 7th. At Monaco, he could not make it out of Q2, and his race was not helped by an off-track pass on Albon, which was penalized. He had the pace, but it's Monaco, and he ultimately finished in 11th. Qualified 4th at Spain and lost positions early, but managed to come back to finish in 4th, even with Verstappen purposely driving into him a few laps after the safety car restart. At the next race weekend, Russell led from start to finish and won the race under a safety car after the McLarens came together. He could not build on this victory, however, as he only qualified 5th at Austria. He did finish there, but 33 seconds behind the next driver ahead. He qualified well for his home race, but gambling onto the slicks for the start of the race saw him stuck in traffic for the majority of the day. He managed to take home P10, but starting 4th, a lone point is hardly a consolation prize. Russell's sprint quali at Spa was compromised by his teammate going off track. He couldn't do much from the back half of the grid. Qualifying behind a Williams did not help, though he managed to overtake Albon to finish 5th on a day where the Mercedes seemed slower than it had all season. He was driving a rather boring race at Hungary until Ferrari unleashed its master plan that saw Leclerc slowly dropping back through the field. Apart from a feisty battle with Alonso, who hadn't pit yet, and a few moments of moving under braking from Leclerc, Russell took home a somewhat easy podium. His score, an 8 out of 10. He is doing what he can with a Mercedes that seems to be the 4th quickest car on any given race weekend. When the team isn't screwing up strategy, Russell seems to be driving very boring races. Too slow to keep up with the McLarens and Ferraris, too fast to be bothered by the midfield. He has destroyed his teammate in qualifying, though his teammate is an 18-year-old rookie and is to be expected. Seems to have minimized mistakes from seasons past, but just doesn't have the car to fight for podiums every weekend. Now moving on to the Ferraris and Lewis Hamilton. He qualified behind Leclerc at Australia but managed to jump him after an early mistake, lost out to his teammate late and finished P10 after Piastri's charged back into the points. He gained his first victory at the Chinese sprint race and finished P6 in the feature race before a disqualification. He started the Japanese Grand Prix in 8th, only managed to move up one position to finish 7th. He started Bahrain 7 positions behind Leclerc but was able to finish right behind him at the end of the race. Jeddah saw him starting 7th behind Sainz in a Williams but managed to pass him during the race and ultimately finished there after Norris came through the field. Hamilton benefited from pitting early in the sprint race in Miami to finish 3rd and only managed a P8 in the Sunday race after the team had him and Leclerc swap positions a few times. He looked to be the slower of the two Ferraris at Imola, but he was helped out by the safety cars and finished 4th after being knocked out in Q2 and starting behind Leclerc. He only managed to qualify P7 at Monaco, but had the pace to get by Hadjar and Alonso via pit strategy. Spain was a disappointing weekend where Hamilton looked the slower of the two Ferraris. He was passed by Hülkenberg late in the race and only finished P6 via Verstappen penalty. Was running P5 in Canada until he hit a groundhog. Yeah, he legit ran over a groundhog and took damage on his car. He finished P6, but damage to his car probably left some points on the table. Hamilton went on to drive an impressive race at Austria, finishing 4th but behind his teammate. His attempt to secure another consecutive podium at Silverstone was thwarted by a charging drive from Hülkenberg, though a P4 finish was still a good result given his difficulties in the Ferrari all year. Hamilton had a horrible start to the Belgian Grand Prix weekend. After a sprint session to forget, his P18 qualifying did not make things better. However, early overtakes in the race and a gutsy call to switch to slicks saw him catapulted up into the points. He couldn't chase down Albon to improve to 6th, but P7 was acceptable for a recovery race from 18th at a track that is getting more and more difficult to pass at. Hamilton's season did not get better at Hungary with a poor qualifying that saw him start 12th. With Leclerc almost winning the race, not finishing in the points is an utter disaster. His score, a 6 out of 10. We all expected Hamilton to need some time to get used to a new car and power unit, but he is just simply too far behind considering he is a 7-time world champion. It was great to see him win the sprint in China, but his 4:10 qualifying record and 42-point deficit to Leclerc leaves a lot to be desired. A few peaks this season, but just consistently inconsistent the rest of the year. Charles Leclerc qualified poorly at the season opener but managed to sit 5th until a mistake and poor strategy cost him a few positions. He was the slower of the two Ferrari drivers at the Chinese sprint, finishing 5th, but finished the featured race 3 seconds ahead of his teammate before plank wear on both Ferraris saw them disqualified. At Japan, he was clearly the faster of the two drivers, managing to qualify and finish in P4. At Bahrain, even a penalty to George Russell was not enough for Leclerc to finish on the podium. He started P2 and dropped to 4th by the end of it all. At Jeddah, he qualified 4th, was able to overtake Russell and hold off a charging Norris to finish on the podium in 3rd. Miami started off poorly after Leclerc crashed in the sprint formation lap and was out of the race. And it did not get better from there, finishing 7th on Saturday after not being able to chase down Antonelli. A poor qualifying at Imola saw him start the race in 11th. He managed to get up to as high as 5th, but a hard defense that could have drawn a penalty saw Leclerc give the position to Albon on the final lap and ultimately finished in 6th. He put in an impressive qualifying at his home race to start in P2. It's Monaco, he finished P2. He only qualified 7th in Spain, but a great restart after the late safety car saw him onto the last spot of the podium. Charles started the Canadian Grand Prix behind his teammate, but a strong race pace allowed him to finish ahead in 5th. He drove well enough to qualify P2 at Austria, but the McLarens were just too quick. He dropped to 3rd right from the start and finished almost 20 seconds behind race winner Lando Norris. Silverstone was one of the rare races he was outqualified by his teammate, and an early switch to slicks did not help his race. He was already struggling with the car before he ushered himself and Sainz off late to come home in 14th. Spa sprint saw Leclerc move up to 3rd before finishing in 4th. He started 3rd ahead of Max during the race, and although Max was always close enough to threaten, Leclerc held the position the entire race. Hungary saw him qualify on pole and he held the lead through the first half of the race. Unfortunately, the pit wall let him down again and had him stop twice, giving up track position and any advantage he had against the quicker McLarens. Russell ultimately passed as well, and a seemingly easy victory turned into a disappointing fourth. His score, 7.5 out of 10. I feel like he needs to listen to his gut more, as his pit wall has let him down over his entire Ferrari career. If he could be decisive like Verstappen, Leclerc would probably have a bunch more points this season. He has outperformed Hamilton in qualifying, but some unforced errors have seen him finish lower than he could have. A solid season so far considering the pace of the car, but he could be doing better. Finally, we get to the McLarens. Lando Norris comfortably held the lead at Australia and managed to hold off Max Verstappen late to secure his first win of the season, even after going off on lap 44 as the rain started falling again. Admittedly made mistakes in sprint qualifying that saw him 8th in the Chinese sprint, though he managed to come back and finish P2 in the feature race, all while managing a brake pedal issue. Beaten by Max in quali in Japan, he did well enough to hold off a charging Piastri to finish P2. An underwhelming qualifying at Bahrain forced him to charge through the field, making up 3 positions to finish on the final step of the podium. He crashed on his first Q3 run at Jeddah, which meant he would start in 10th, managed to fight his way up to 4th, but more points were possible this weekend. In the Miami sprint, Norris was sitting in P2 until a late safety car helped him win the sprint. The featured race saw him start in P2, but a scuffle on lap 1 saw him drop down to 6th. He managed to come back through the field, but time lost battling Verstappen saw him only manage to finish 2nd. He started Imola in 4th, but going long allowed him to benefit from the VSC. He wisely pitted for fresh tires on the full safety car, which allowed him to catch up to and pass Piastri to finish 2nd. Monaco was a nice little weekend that saw Norris take the win from pole. He qualified P2 behind his teammate at Spain, but lost out to Verstappen immediately in the race. It wasn't until lap 13 that Norris got by into P2, where he finished. But Piastri looked quicker all weekend. A shockingly poor qualifying at Canada saw him start 7th, move up to 5th, and then crash out of the race late when trying to get by his own teammate. After not scoring at Canada, Lando came back to take pole at Austria and lead from lights to flag. He survived early attacks from his teammate and then managed his tires well enough to hold off Piastri late. After being outshone by his teammate on Saturday at his home race, he managed to take advantage of errors from both drivers ahead to come home with his first Silverstone victory. Norris couldn't do much stuck behind his teammate in the sprint race at Spa, but looked to capitalize on pole position for the featured race. Unfortunately, not being brave enough in Sector 1 at race start saw him lose the lead immediately. Chasing his teammate down for a last lap battle seemed possible, but a mistake at turn 1 on the penultimate lap saw an end to any chances of that happening. Norris seemed the slower of the 2 McLarens at Hungary through qualifying and the start of the race. He managed to take back a position lost to Alonso on race start, but by then he was on the back foot. The decision to go long and stay on a one-stop strategy ultimately helped secure track position. He managed his tires well enough to hold off his teammate on fresher tires and take home what could have been his second win at Hungary. His score, 7.5 out of 10. Qualifying errors seem to be the problem with Norris this season. On days where he could have taken pole, mental mistakes have cost him. With more experience than his teammate and the fastest car in the grid, Norris should be leading the championship, but he finds himself losing the qualifying battle and 9 points behind at the summer break. Fortunately, Norris's record against Piastri is better than his record against Verstappen, so a 9-point deficit should not be a problem. However, for someone who is in his 7th year in F1 and 7th for the same team, Norris should be leading this championship. Piastri also seems to be handling on-track battles with Verstappen much better than Norris, which might become a problem if the championship fight stays tight and Verstappen decides to play spoiler later on in the season. And finally, we come to the current championship leader, Oscar Piastri. At Australia, a race where both Max and Lando made mistakes, Oscar was unable to capitalize, and his own huge mistake saw him drop all the way down the grid. He managed to pit Verstappen for P2 at the China sprint and then led from lights to flag during the feature race, qualified behind his teammate at Japan, where ultimately he finished in 3rd. He qualified Bahrain on pole and had a 7-second lead when a safety car halfway through the race brought the field together before he extended his lead and won by almost 16 seconds. He only qualified second at Jeddah, but a penalty on the first lap to Verstappen helped him finish in first, ahead of a seemingly faster Red Bull. At a wet Miami sprint, he took the lead at turn 1 and held it until late in the race when a late safety car saw Norris take the lead and win under yellow flags. On Sunday, he managed to outsmart Verstappen early on to take home the win. Imola saw Piastri lose out from pole. After being too timid on turn 1 and losing out to Verstappen, he lost out again by pitting early under VSC, dropping another position to Norris. If that weren't bad enough, he stayed out under the final safety car and was gobbled up by Norris on fresh tires, finishing in third. He was outshone by his teammate at Monaco, managing to only finish third behind a Ferrari. He started on pole at Spain and held on to the lead even with Norris closing up after the late safety car. Canada saw a bit of weakness from the McLarens for the first time all year. Starting third, he lost out to Antonelli immediately, and a late battle with Norris saw the two McLarens come together, ending the race for his teammate, while Piastri managed to hold on to fourth under the safety car. At Austria, he only managed a P3 qualifying, but a brave move at the start of the race saw him up to P2 immediately. Threatened early on, but Norris just had too much pace at the end. He looked to take his first victory at Silverstone before an un-Oscar-like move copped a time penalty that ultimately saw his teammate take the win instead. A very rare mistake from a driver who usually has the calmest head on the grid. Piastri secured sprint pole but lost P1 to Verstappen on the first lap at Spa and never gained it back. He would play the pole spoiler by overtaking his teammate on the first green flag lap in the race on his way to securing his first win at Belgium. He seemed to be the quicker of the two McLarens at Hungary, but a two-stop race saw him lose out to his teammate who only stopped once. He had fresher tires by the end of the race but just could not do enough to get by. His score, 8.5 out of 10. For only entering his third year, he seems to have a much calmer demeanor than his teammate, not allowing Verstappen to get in his head during races and force errors. He is currently out-qualifying his teammate, and if not for some untimely strategy calls, would probably be handily leading the championship. There have been a few mistakes on track, such as his safety car restart at Silverstone, but Oscar seems to be making the most of all his opportunities this year. And there you go, boys and girls, we have the mid-season report for all the F1 drivers up on the screen. Let me know what you guys think. Was I accurate in some of my critiques or was I wrong? Let me know what you would have graded these drivers this year. And remember to hit subscribe and blah blah blah, do all that stuff if you think I've earned it. And I will see you all in the next one.